Bravo bosses. This is the Bravo Investigator Podcast. I'm your host, Dana, and today we are doing a catch-up episode on In the City, recapping episodes 2 to 4. Let's get into it. Happy Sunday, everyone. I hope everyone's had a great weekend, and you don't have the Sunday scaries. I do a little bit. Kind of wish I had tomorrow off, but gotta suck it up. Go to work on a Monday, but happy Sunday. I know you guys haven't seen me on a Sunday in a while, but I thought that since Summer House is officially, shall we say, ending this week with its bonus episode, and they're not going to throw anything else crazy at us, I should start recapping In the City because it is pretty much just the continuation of what we have continued to talk about on Summer House. So I did recap In the City episode 1 in the same episode that I recapped the season finale of Summer House. So that was a few weeks back. And then I just kind of left it because we've been so busy with Love Island and all the other Summer House stuff. But again, I figured why not do a catch-up episode on this, and then we'll start fresh with episode 5 this week. So this week, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to have a Monday episode. My apologies in advance if I don't. I just woke up from a nap. I have been napping all weekend. It is Sunday right now, obviously, as I said. And this is typically when I record the Monday episodes as well. But I have been sleeping all weekend. I'm so out of it, kind of out of it right now. Haven't fully come to terms with the fact that we're podcasting in this moment in time. I'll get there. So I have to see if we will do a Monday episode, but we'll definitely have our Tuesday episode with Yana Firestone, where we'll be recapping the season finale of The Real Housewives of Rhode Island. And then on Wednesday, I will be joined by Christina Ariel to cover the bonus episode of Summer House, the reunion finale, whatever you want to call it, that big bonus episode where we're going to have a sit down with Kyle and West and Amanda and Lindsay and Sierra and Miha, which I'm very excited about. And then on Friday, I'm having Jamie Rice join me from the Murderish podcast. And she also has a new podcast with Katie Janella called Bravo's Most Wanted, I believe. And she will be joining me to recap episode 5 of In the City. So we need to catch up before she gets here, right? So let's get into it. As I said, we already covered episode 1. So just as kind of like a little bit of a recap, that episode transitioned right from the Summer House when everybody was leaving. And we had Kyle and Amanda basically going home separately. And we learned that she wanted to move out, which we knew at the end of Summer House. We got introduced to a bunch of new characters. There's Kenny and Whitney. Whitney has moved across country from LA to be with Kenny without a ring. And Lindsay thought that was kind of interesting. Lindsay is still navigating life as a mom of her daughter Gemma, who is 10 months old, and she's navigating custody and I guess parental arrangements with her baby daddy Turner. We have Yvonne and Nick. Yvonne has been friends with Lindsay for 16 years. They came from the hospitality PR world together. Gavin owns a bunch of bars, and he's been friends with Kyle for a really long time. And Kenny has also been friends with Kyle for a really long time. He even invested in Loverboy. Trying to remember the rest of our characters. Then we have Andrea and Lexi. You'll remember Andrea from Winter House and some of Summer House. And we have Georgina, who is a single mom to 2 kids. Her ex left her when she was 30 weeks pregnant, and we still want to know more on that story and what happened there. But I think that is it in terms of, Danielle. Gotta forget about Danielle, right? We always do. Danielle and Owen. So she is dating this guy who is allegedly still married, and that's kind of the hot goss of the group. And Lindsay and Danielle are still not in a good place because of the years of things that Danielle has done to Lindsay, according to Lindsay. So I think that's it. I think that's the cast of characters, and that's pretty much what we got introduced to in episode 1. So we pick up in episode 2 where Amanda is packing up her stuff and Kyle is basically watching. And I'm sorry, you guys, but he was absolutely right. She is so messy. There is stuff everywhere. There is clothes everywhere. And I know that New York apartments are statistically very, very small, but that's why organization is important, right? And she kind of acts like this is organized chaos, but There is clothing in every hallway, every orifice of this place. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, there is a fly in here. I apologize. So you might see a fly flying around me. My balcony door was open earlier and it's raining, and so that attracts them. My apologies. But anyways, Amanda tells the camera that she feels really good about this decision, and this might be what she needs to save their relationship. I mean, for someone like Amanda, who statistically isn't really good at making decisions or really doing much, I guess you kind of got to give her props for the fact that she is following through with something and actually making a decision. But she seems really steadfast in this decision. Like, she tells Kyle, you're going to court me. We're going to date each other, right? Like, I'm going to come by at 4 a.m. and wake you up the same way that you wake me up, right? Like, she seems really sure that this is the thing to do, which is interesting because I heard somewhere, it may have been in one of the episodes, but I heard it on a podcast and not in one of the episodes, but something like their therapist told them that this wasn't a good idea, right? I mean, it's crazy that I actually forgot about this until today, but I was in this exact same situation where I was with someone who was like, okay, let's not separate as a couple, but let's no longer live together. And I went along with it because I was just desperate to save the relationship, right? And like watching her say to Kyle, like, oh, maybe we could pack up your car. And it's like this bitch expecting him to help her move out when he doesn't even want this. And then I'm like, oh my God, that happened to me. I like completely forgot that happened to me, because the day that my ex was going to move back in with his parents, the elevators were broken in our apartment building. I'm the only one that has a car. I have strep throat, and I am helping him move up and down the stairs, boxes down 11 flights of stairs to my car to drive him home. I cannot believe I did that. I am a fool, but it felt very much like this, right? Amanda keeps downplaying it, keeps calling it like this 1 month vacation. And Kyle's like, okay, but like we got to go back to therapy. Therapy wasn't really helping, and we got to just figure something out. And Amanda's like making this joke where she's picking up her sneakers and she's like, oh, I should bring these in order to run away from you. And Kyle just seems very lost and confused. And I don't blame him, right? Because it's like, he knows that their relationship is in a bad place and he knows that they need to do something drastic, but he doesn't really feel like this is it. He doesn't feel like he's been a part of this decision. This is very much what Amanda wants to do, and she will not let him be a part of this in any way, shape, or form. And so he feels very alone in his own relationship, which he always has, right? Like, this isn't really anything new for Kyle and Amanda, but he feels really alone because he's just like, all of these decisions are being made without me. These aren't things that I really want to do, but okay, if this is what I have to do to save my relationship, right? And like, he's still in this place. I mean, we've definitely seen him angry with her, right? We've seen him swear at her. We've seen all of these things. But when it comes to the state of their relationship, I think it makes him really sad. But when it comes to Amanda, it seems to make her really angry. And that's why she like lashes out with these little digs at him while he's just sitting there looking like a little puppy and making us feel bad for him, right? And I don't know, right? This has always been a difficult dance for us as the viewers because he is a shitty husband. But knowing everything that we know now and seeing even the way that she's treating this separation in contrast to the way that he's treating it, I don't know, it just makes us sad for him. So then we get this scene of Lindsay and Gavin going for drinks. Lindsay met Gavin through Kyle, and they are both in the hospitality industry, and he's basically just a good time. So what I think Gavin is for this show, because he is single, which is supposed to be like contradictory to what the show is supposed to be. But yeah, he's like the single guy of the show, but he owns so many bars in New York that I think that he was sort of hired because, like, now they don't have to deal with all of the issues of trying to film in venues. That is statistically so hard for these shows to find places to film because of the fighting, because of like all of the different things that can go on with regards to filming. And so now they can just go to Gavin's joints, right? It really works out great. So Lindsay talks about how Gavin kind of came for her the week before, sorry, not Gavin, how Kenny kind of came for her the week before when she was questioning Whitney moving across the country without a ring. And Gavin tells Lindsay that Kenny can sort of dish it out, but he can't take it, which is something that I've noticed about Kenny, right? Like, he's a guy who has a lot to say, but when anyone sort of comes at him about what he said, he definitely does get sort of defensive. So I don't really think that anything Lindsay did was giving I hate men vibes, because remember, Kenny was saying that about her. And I think that Kenny, I mean, we'll get into this more later, but I really think that in that scene, right? So remember that this was in the first episode. Everyone's at a bar. Lindsay questions Kenny on moving Whitney across the country without a ring. And she just says that it's a really big deal, right? And Kenny starts kind of like going off on her and being like, oh, I'm getting I hate men vibes, when really all Lindsay is doing is just like asking questions about their relationship. And I don't know. I don't really think it was like in the judgmental way that he was necessarily getting it. But the fact that Danielle's ex, Robert, do you guys remember Robert? Okay, she dated Robert for years. He is the chef at one of Gavin's bars. Like, this is New York City. New York City is huge. And the fact that Robert works at one of these bars, and remember that Robert worked in like Aspen for a while and Montauk for a while. So it's not even like he was like fully in New York City before. So it's crazy that he, of all things, it's just so weirdly full circle that he ends up being somebody that works in one of Gavin's bars, and we actually get a Robert sighting on in the city. Like, it's crazy. So that transitions us to the Danielle conversation. And Lindsay explains to Gavin that she feels that Danielle keeps doing stuff to her and she keeps giving her a pass, but she just sort of feels like she wants to be more careful about who she surrounds herself with lately and who she gives her time to. That completely makes sense. I mean, you know, as a mom, you don't have as much time anymore to yourself and definitely to spend with friends. So you definitely want to spend that with people that you value and that you feel you can trust. But I am curious what Lindsay's involvement was with the casting of this show. Now, obviously, very involved, okay? Like, this is literally a cast of her friends. But when it came to Danielle, I wonder if she had recommended Danielle or the show had thought about it, whether the show had approached her about it and gotten her okay on it, whether she had every intention of including Danielle and kind of giving her the cold shoulder for a few episodes, but then kind of warming up. I don't really know, but I think it's interesting to think about considering this is sort of like quote unquote Lindsay's show and Danielle is here and she doesn't really want Danielle around, right? Now, I know that historically people hate Danielle, but I think she has such a perfect cringe factor for reality TV that, you know, I think it's a lovable cringe, right? Like I think she brings something to these shows that makes me laugh, makes me enjoy her in some sort of way. And I'm here for it. I'm not against Danielle, right? Like I'll take a little Danielle here and there. I think she's great for reality TV. I think that she gives into moments. I think that she creates drama. I think that she's a little cringe, like I said, right? And a little cringe never hurt anybody when it came to reality TV. So then we get this scene of Kenny and Whitney going for a walk, and she's talking about how difficult it's been for her to make friends since she's been here in New York. And Kenny vents about the girls and thinks that Danielle is dating a guy who's married. Lindsay just had a baby with a guy after 2 months, so maybe they shouldn't be judging his relationship. Okay, fair, right? Like everybody has different kinds of relationships. But I don't think that that's what Lindsay was doing. I don't think that she was judging the relationship. She was just saying it's a big deal. And especially since we learned that Kenny and Whitney have only been together, or they've only known each other for a year. Like their first date was a year ago, but he said that he wasn't like fully committed to her at the beginning anyways because of his mother dying and he was just, you know, not really in that place. So, you know, to be together officially, like exclusively for less than a year and to move all the way across the country for someone, yeah, it's a big deal. All we're saying is that it's a big deal. Nobody is saying that it shouldn't happen or anything like that. They're just saying, like, yeah, it's a big deal. So he also talks a little bit about how he feels fucked over by Gavin for that moment, right? For sort of making fun of him, for hooking up with people since he's met Whitney. And his explanation at the bar, which was in that first episode, was like, yeah, I lost my mom. Whitney and I had already gone on a date, but, you know, I wasn't really in that place. I was going through all of this shit with my mom, so we weren't like official for a while. And Gavin sort of calls him out on being like a fuck boy as a way of like mourning the death of his mom, which I thought was kind of funny. And we don't really know as much of the context either, right? Like Gavin and Kenny obviously have known each other a really long time. I know it sounds sort of crass because he's saying like, oh, like the way that you got through the death of your mom was like, you know, fucking a bunch of randoms. But we don't know if that was actually the case. We don't know if Whitney was also aware. We don't know if they were like officially like not together in a way where she was fully conscious of everything else that he was doing. I don't really know. I think we'll probably garner more information as the time goes on. But Kenny tells the camera that when his mom died, it was one of the hardest things in the world for him. And he and Whitney were dating, but he couldn't feel like he could be exactly what she needed, so they broke up. So, if he needed to, kind of get his rocks off during the meantime because he didn't feel like he could be that for her with all the things that he was going through, you know, if she's aware of it and that was the situation, then that's fine, right? But I could see why he could feel put off by Gavin in that moment because if losing his mom was one of the hardest things in the world for him, then anything sort of associated with that or making fun of anything associated with that can be kind of hurtful. I think that kind of makes sense. So we have Lindsay telling the camera that she's been in mediation with her baby daddy about Gemma for a really long time. They basically have to make all of these decisions about her future, which she finds is kind of crazy because it's like, I don't know what she's going to need or want up until the time that she's 18 years old. And she's hoping that this is just sort of a piece of paper that they put in the drawer and don't ever really need to use. That's why I wasn't really sure exactly what this was, because I'm just like, it's not like necessarily custody, but I guess maybe it's like their parenting plan or how they figure out like weekends and stuff like that and holidays. But we also get a scene with Lindsay and Georgina hanging out together, and we find out that Georgina's ex moved out on her when she was 30 weeks pregnant, but she and her ex are in a pretty good place right now. I definitely want to know more about this ex, how this all happened. I don't even know if they were like officially married or anything like that, but it would take me a really long time to get to a good place with somebody too who left me while pregnant and with a toddler. Like that's absolutely insane. And so I think that Lindsay and Georgina sort of bond on that because, Lindsay's baby daddy left her not very long after having the baby. And so she was basically a single mom from the jump. Georgina was a single mom from the jump with her second kid. So I feel like they have a lot in common in that regard and can really bond. We have a scene of the guys getting together, and Kenny expresses that he didn't like it when Gavin contributed to Lindsay and her minions ganging up on him, and he really felt like his boy should have had his back. Now, Kyle tells the camera, because he sort of knows these guys for a really long time and knows them from the back end, that Gavin is used to Kenny being in a relationship, but not necessarily being in a good relationship or being happy. So this is sort of a transition for him too. And I think that that's sort of interesting, right? Because, you don't get the vibe from Gavin that he's necessarily jealous of Whitney being around all the time, but maybe that's a little bit what this is. Like maybe he is making like these little snarky comments because deep down he's a little bit jealous that he's losing time with his boy, right? That could be very possible. Again, because we don't know these people that well, I really didn't take it that way when I saw Gavin make that comment or like that silly comment about like fucking around as a way of mourning. Again, I could totally understand why why Kenny would be put off by that. Sorry, I'm still trying to memorize all of these people's names because they are all still new to me because this is a really large cast. Like this really is. There are so many couples that we still barely know, even going into episode 5. But all of that being said, I can understand where Kenny is coming from. Expecting his friend to sort of have his back there. But I really don't like the fact that he calls Lindsay and her friends minions because it was a pile of people who were all listening to the conversation, but it was really just Lindsay just asking questions and nobody was really like jumping on any sort of bandwagon. It was really just, a group of people at a bar having a conversation. And I feel like Kenny takes a lot of things as an attack that aren't necessarily an attack. So Kyle ends up telling the guys about Amanda wanting to move out, and they tell him that he should use this time to figure out what he wants to. And it was interesting. I think it was Andrea who said this in this moment. He's like, I love Kyle and I love Amanda. I just don't necessarily know if I love you guys together. And that's something that Sierra had mentioned as well, like in the summer house. Like, we love both of you guys. It just might not be right for you guys to be together. And every time Kyle talks about this, like, honestly, I sort of melt into the floor because you can just see how incredibly down in the dumps he is. He doesn't know what else he can possibly do. I cannot even imagine feeling so out of control in my own relationship that would be really stressful. So Kenny throws Whitney a welcome to New York party, and he does invite Lindsay because she is part of the cast. And Lindsay basically avoids Danielle the entire time, and she's pretty hurt by it. She feels like Lindsay has been really cold to her. Kyle pulls her aside and tells her that Lindsay, like, he says, I don't want to use the word slut, but Lindsay basically called you boy crazy, which which is weird, right? I mean, like, he also mentions this alleged hand job that Danielle gave to Carl many years ago, which we have all looked into, right? Because this is something that is on the list of things that Lindsay is upset with Danielle about, which is that the first time that Carl and Lindsay dated in season 4, that Danielle gave Carl an over the pants hand job in an Uber to Montauk like a week later, right? So Danielle's like, I don't think I even did that. And why is this even coming up like so many years later? But boy, crazy. I mean, I would say after she broke up with Robert, she was sort of running amok, and the way that she was on Winter House was very cringe when it came to the way that she was with guys. But, she's been in several long-term relationships. I don't know that I necessarily call her boy crazy, but it's interesting that that's what was relayed from Lindsay to Kyle. Um, then Lindsay pulls Kenny aside to try to like mediate things with him. And Lindsay just sort of explains who she is to him. She's like, listen, I'm just a person that like asks a lot of questions. It's how I help myself get to know people. And Kenny's like, yeah, well, your line of questioning wasn't normal and didn't feel genuine. And it's like, again, like she's coming over here to try to like figure things out with you and, be a part of the cast together. And you're refusing to take what she's saying at face value. Your automatic assumption is that she's trying to attack you. And she's telling you, like, that's not what I'm doing. Kenny accuses her of being constant drama. And he also accuses her of projecting her insecurities onto his relationship. Like, he brings up the whole thing about her having a baby daddy after dating this guy for a couple of months or whatever. And she's like, okay, like again, I was just asking you questions about your relationship. I don't have many girlfriends who would move across the country without a ring, so I was just asking about it. There was nothing even about it that was drama. If anything, as Lindsay said, she's like, you're the one who's fighting with me. Like, she came over there to sort of like work things out with him, and he started fighting with her. So, to be quite honest, he is the one starting drama here. I guess she could have not approached him at all, but I think she was doing her job by trying to figure things out with him and get in a good place with him and move things along with him. But he just has this innate hate for Lindsay. Like, they don't know each other well from what I know, right? Like, it doesn't seem like they had a prior relationship. But I would like to know what Kenny went into this show knowing about Lindsay, or what his impression of Lindsay was going into this show, because he really seems to have a very strong hatred for her that I feel like must predate the show. Because if it's just based on that one conversation in the bar where she's asking about him moving Whitney across the country for a ring, if that's it, then I'm sorry, sir, that is not good enough to show that like she is constant drama, she's a jerk, she is a mean girl, she's all of these things. Like, I really didn't see any of that in that one scene. And sir, you are the one now causing drama. So we end episode 2 with Kyle talking to his mom on the phone about him and Amanda separating. His mom gets pretty emotional and says that, well, as you know, like Kyle's dad, he was with his previous marriage for 10 years and they had 2 kids, and he felt very stuck in it. But he did end up leaving, which is what gave Kyle's mom the chance to meet him, right? Which is crazy that I didn't know this. I did an entire deep dive on Kyle and could not find very much information about him prior to the show. So it's crazy to know that his dad had a whole ass other family and that he has 2 entire other brothers. Had absolutely no idea. But Kyle gets very emotional, obviously, and he said that he never thought he'd be sitting here alone and he feels like a failure, right? A marriage is something that you work really hard at. And I think it's very normal for people who go through a divorce and a separation to feel like I failed at something. I did something or I tried to achieve something that was supposed to be for the rest of my life and it didn't work, right? And again, we know that Kyle was not a good husband. That is absolutely indisputable. But it is really hard to watch him sit here and kind of break down and have all of these emotions alone because, he is going through all of this alone. He doesn't really have they don't seem to continue to be going to therapy. It doesn't really seem like he has a huge support system in this regard. So it just feels really sad to sort of watch him sit here and go through this where he can't really do anything to change it. He just sort of has to wait it out until Amanda tells him that it's over, right? And it's just really sad. Okay, then we move into episode 3, and this episode starts with Amanda, Wes, and Sierra getting together. And this is the episode that we were talking about, or at least the chunk of the episode that we were talking about online when it came out, because this felt just so incredibly wild to watch. So Amanda tells the camera that she's been best friends with Sierra for a few years now, and she's like obsessed with that woman. And then she's like, Wes and I have become good friends over the summer. And she says that Wes and Sierra have now become best friends recently, too. And that has just given her this perfect little trio of best friends. Then the producers do this sort of like wiki, like flashback sort of thing and bring us into current time where it shows, like we wanted, a timestamp on the confessional, and it says May the 5th. And the producer says to Amanda, I think that we should talk about things as they currently are since we have, this current knowledge. Now, the date of the coffee that she goes out with Wes and Sierra for, that is October 22nd, 2025. So this is the point in time where she's saying, like, this is my perfect little trio and I couldn't be happier. So Amanda says to the producer, I know what this looks like, but I am in this moment so happy because I have my two friends together. And the producer asks her, was there even like an inkling of a crush there? And she says, no, not at all. Like, these two people are two very important people to me, which is interesting wording because that's the same wording that West used on Watch What Happens Live when Andy questioned him on whether anything was going on between him and Amanda. He's like, that is a very important person to me. So it's interesting that she used that same verbiage. But anyways, and, she says, like, in this moment, like, I couldn't be happier just having my two best friends here. There is no crush. There is no anything, which again, given that that was October 22nd, it just seems wild, right? Like, there's no way that you didn't have any feelings forming by that point. So they talk about her moving out and what she hopes to accomplish with that space. She says that Kyle came home at 8 o'clock in the morning the other day from an SNL after party. Wes asks Amanda if she ever just tells him, like, if you ever do this again, that she'll just leave his bitch ass. And Amanda almost like uses Wes as a good example of like going out and drinking because she's like, well, didn't you guys go out the other night? And I called you, Wes, and you said that Kyle was fine. But then he came home at 11:30 and fell asleep in the kitchen. And Wes was like, well, I was in bed by 11:30. So it's almost like we're comparing two fuckboys and like which one is the better one, like who's the better drinker and going outer, right? And I think that's what this all sort of came down to because we heard Amanda say at the reunion, like, it's that I didn't like going out with Kyle. He would get blackout. I would have to like drag him out of a bar. Like, he'd come home at like 6 o'clock in the morning, all that stuff. While Wes, on the other hand, well, we like going to bars together. And I think she's trying to show an example of like, well, because he'll just have a few drinks and then come home and be in bed by like 11:30, right? So I think she's like, the lesser of two evils is the guy who drinks less and goes to bed a little bit earlier than the guy who drinks a lot and becomes belligerent, which is fair, right? It kind of is fair. Ugh, I don't know, right? You gotta have to think about that one for a second. But anyways, Kyle ends up having a conversation with his staff over the state of Loverboy, and he says that they may need to look for other jobs. They may be out of money by the end of the year. I only bring up this part because it was so small just to say, like, this entire scandal has truly saved Loverboy in a way that I don't think anybody thought that it ever would. From the merch to everything else, like even I bought a sweatshirt, not Carl's a Mess. I bought Summer Should Be Fun, which has been out of stock forever, but I was really, really excited that it was back in stock. So, I mean, isn't it crazy if you think about it? Because so many people got hurt out of this entire thing. But if there's anything positive that came out of it, it's, it revitalized a dying business, which had employees, right? So like nobody wants all of these employees to have to go find new jobs. So if anything, like thank you, Scamanda, for saving Loverboy. So we have a scene of Lindsay going out with this milkman guy named Frank, who Andrea set her up with. He drinks rosé. He works out every day. It's kind of a flop, but it's only her second date since ending things with her baby daddy. But she's fine to just have fun and not be intentional. And I think that we're going to get a lot of scenes of Lindsay going on dates, which I think is fun. It's a very like in the city vibe, it's very, even the guy on the date said, like, you're giving Samantha Jones. And she's like, because I was going to say this is giving Sex in the City, except without the sex, right? But that's essentially what Lindsay ends up saying to this Frank guy on the date. She's like, yeah, Samantha Jones without the sex, because she's not really having sex with anyone at all. But I think it's going to be fun to watch Lindsay just sort of navigate the city as a single mom. We get a scene of Yvonne and Georgina going for a walk with their kids. Georgina said that the hardest part about being pregnant was going up and down the subway stairs, which I cannot even imagine. Okay. Here in Toronto, the subway stairs are also very steep. I can barely navigate them as an overweight person. When I wasn't overweight, I could barely navigate them. So I cannot even imagine what that's like pregnant. Like, my God. And as we know, she was left by her partner while she was pregnant. But she brings this up really just to say, like, there's really never a good time to have kids. You just kind of got to do it. Yvonne wants kids. She never saw herself as the type who was going to have to pressure her partner to do it. She has a huge family from Iraq, but, she feels like Nick isn't ready and it's something that she wants to do. She just doesn't really know how to move the needle with him. Now, we obviously know in current day, Yvonne is pregnant. So congratulations to Yvonne. She convinced him. So that's all good. But yeah, it's kind of cute to watch some of these newer friendships form and watching them navigate and kind of get to know each other as well. So we get a scene of Whitney's movers coming to move her stuff into Kenny's place. I didn't know this about Kenny. So he was apparently raised by a single mom in a shack. He and his mom and his brother all shared one room together. So this apartment that he lives in, which is massive, by the way, this is something that he basically manifested. And like, go off, King. Proud of you, right? Like, as much as he is like the villain of this season, if he came from hard upbringings and he's in this amazing place now, like, gotta give him props and good for him, right? He starts making fun of all of Whitney's things. Like, he's like, there's a million boxes. You have 26 black t-shirts. And she's like, I'm not really an outfit repeater. And then she has like these like wooden balls, which are sort of like, just like decorative balls. And he's making fun of them. And he's like, what would we do without all of these decorative balls? And eventually she starts to cry because she just sort of feels like he's making this process more difficult on her when, again, this is such a huge transition for her to pick up and move, to leave all of her friends, all of that. She just feels like he's not being as supportive as he could be. And so she gets upset and he apologizes and everything. But, it's interesting that he's always going on about how the girls are the problem and they're the mean girls and they're the ones not really integrating Whitney when, it seems like all she needs is maybe just a little bit more support from her actual partner. Then we get a scene of Lindsay and Danielle getting coffee together because Lindsay has eventually given in and agreed to go out with Danielle. Now, Lindsay explains to Danielle, listen, there is always something with you that you're doing to me. Like last year, I was having a baby. I was really excited about that. And then you're making these comments about like, oh, did Lindsay throw this gender reveal party just to kind of throw it in Carl's face? And, she was moving too fast with Carl, but moving too slow with Turner. So she just sort of feels like with Danielle, she's always doing something wrong and always sort of being judged for it. Then there was the hand job thing, which Lindsay also brought up. And Danielle's like, I really don't think that I did that. Now, like I said, I've gone back, I've checked the tapes, and it is something that Carl said that she did. But because it was an over the pants HJ, it was probably really quick. It probably wasn't to completion, and they were probably drunk. So she probably doesn't remember it. And it kind of sucks for Danielle being like pregnant in current time to even have to like continue to talk about this, to be quite honest. But Danielle apologizes and explains that she's never had any malintent. And Lindsay's like, we've had this conversation before. Like, you're coming from a good place, but your delivery sucks. And so you need to work on your delivery. Danielle agrees with that. She even tells the camera that her delivery might be off. But she does point out that she is usually right. You can't really necessarily argue with that. I mean, some of the points that she has made, she has ended up being right about, but she's going to try to be less vocal about it. So I think that that's a fair compromise. So while they're out, they find out that the group is at a boozy brunch, so they decide to join. Now, Kyle, for some reason, feels like Danielle owes an apology to Amanda. And I'm like, for what now? So Danielle explains to the camera that she's had a complicated history with Amanda. She says that Amanda and her have never actually had beef with each other, but Amanda will always sort of get involved in somebody else's beef, which is against Danielle. And she feels like she'll be right there to join the Danielle bashing train. Like, for example, she's saying at the Whitney's Welcome to New York party, Amanda was trying to explain to Danielle why Lindsay was upset with her. And then Danielle kept asking if she was done. And when she said yes, Danielle turned her back on her. So, to Amanda's point, like, she's just like, I was just trying to help you. You're not listening to me trying to help you. You're getting upset with me. And now you're turning your back on me. I've never it's interesting because we've seen that scene pop up a lot ever since Scamanda happened, where it's from like season 4 or 5. It was the season that Jules was in, where the girls are playing a game and Danielle, and I think it's even like in this scene of In the City, where Danielle says that she trusts Amanda the least, right? We still haven't gotten clarification on what that really means. And I think it's fair for Danielle to say, like, she's had a complicated relationship with Amanda because I think for us as viewers, it's not really something that we've ever fully seen. I mean, they've been in each other's lives for a very long time, but I've never really seen them have their own separate friendship and have never really understood what that entails. So it was really interesting to kind of garner some more information on that and to kind of get a sense of how they both feel about each other. I think it sort of seems like for Danielle, like she explained, that she's always just getting on the Danielle bashing train. And I think for Amanda, she just feels like Danielle is never listening to her and maybe talking down to her and treating her as like a lesser than. But I don't know if they'll ever be able to come to a place where they can actually have a friendship. I'm not sure whether they would even, I mean, they would probably never even have a friendship if not for the other friends that they have in common, because I think that they really are only friends through having other friends in common. Um, so at this same lunch, Kenny starts talking about his issues with Lindsay, and he's just like, Lindsay, you have like these 5 girls here who are all of your minions. And Lindsay's like, these aren't my minions, these are my friends. And Kenny calls them a mean girl crew. And Lindsay starts like clapping at Kenny to pay attention to her, that they are not mean girls. These are all people that have their own opinions. Kenny then asks her if she's been sniffing glue, which is extremely rude. And he tells the camera that one day the minions will revolt, but for now we live under the tyranny of Lindsay Hubbard. Okay, I have a lot to say about this scene because I just thought that this was wild. Kenny, these people are not minions. Not a single person at this table has sided with Lindsay in any way, shape, or form. This all started with a conversation at a bar where Lindsay was asking questions about him moving Whitney across the country without a ring and just saying it was a big deal. As I said, barely anyone in that group said anything. At this table now, no one is saying anything. No one is being mean. If anything, Lindsay is trying to integrate Whitney into this group by trying to be supportive of her. Like no one is saying like Whitney shouldn't be here. We don't like Whitney. If anything, the girls are spending time with Whitney and Lindsay is trying to stand up for Whitney. So I do not understand why Kenny and even Whitney a little bit are considering these people to be a group of mean girls or to consider Lindsay to be a mean girl when she hasn't been mean to Whitney or anyone. This is not even me just doing a defense of Lindsay, because when Lindsay is wrong, I will tell you that she's wrong. I don't think she has done anything wrong. And I don't think the group has done anything wrong either, because minions are what Kenny is trying to say is all of the other girls here are like under like Queen Lindsay's tyranny, right? Like she's the boss and they're all just agreeing with what she says, which is what minions do. But no one has said anything. No one at this table is like, Lindsay is right. Listen to Lindsay. Everyone is just off doing their own thing. And these people are like in their 40s, which is what Lindsay is kind of trying to say. Like, I've been friends with Yvonne for 16 years. I've known Georgina a few years. Before that, she was my dermatologist. These people have their own lives. They do their own things. They have their own brains. Amanda is like barely even real friends with Lindsay, right? They only like are friends through the show, through Kyle. So I think he's trying to create a storyline here that isn't really valid. Mean Girls would mean that they are not coming to Whitney's Welcome to New York party. It would be leaving her out of events. That would be being mean girls to Whitney. But none of these girls have been mean to Whitney. They have been inclusive with everything with her. So I think he's trying to create a storyline that doesn't exist. I think it's a great storyline. I think it would be great on any other show, but it's just not relevant here. You're talking about things that literally don't exist. So then we get this scene of Whitney being invited by Lexi and Georgina, two of the other girls, to go for a walk in the park. And Georgina talks about how she's looking to date and how she's more interested in being set up by someone than meeting someone on an app because she wants a really good person, a good quality person, and she doesn't know that she would necessarily find that on an app. She thinks that she probably can't find it on an app because when she puts in her parameters, there is essentially no one there. I think that's totally fair. I think when you have two kids, you need to be super crazy selective about who you bring into your life. And I think it makes a lot more sense to try to meet someone through someone that you know, if that's even possible, right? Than have to go on an app and meet like a bunch of strangers and have to like integrate a stranger into your life. Anyway, Lexi tells Whitney that she and Andrea heard from Kyle that Kenny said that he is unsure if there's a spark between them. So this triggers Whitney because her last ex basically ended things with her because he felt like she just wasn't the one. She doesn't understand why Kenny would say that when she just moved here. And Lexi also said that Kenny used the word murky to describe their relationship future. So we'll get back to this later in the next episode, but keep this all sort of in your back pocket. So we end the episode with Amanda and Kyle going to do the Boys Lie podcast together. Amanda basically tells the camera that she's like a professional at acting like everything's fine. She said that there's been so many times where she and Kyle have been in a really bad place where she's had to act like everything was fine, like an Us Weekly party, put on a fake smile, and just basically like act the part. And I thought that that was interesting because that is like lying, if you think about it, right? Like we're trying to get to know Amanda as a person. We're trying to figure out who she is because we barely have known who she is this whole time, it appears like. And I think that this sort of adds to some context to the person that she is, right? Like if she's putting on a face and acting like things are fine, that's what we've maybe been seeing during times when they haven't been fine. And so maybe we didn't have as much context for their relationship as we thought because she wasn't being like fully honest about it. She tells Kyle that she found an apartment, but the only problem is that it's a 1-year lease. And Kyle is like, this is starting to feel permanent, right? I mean, because she wanted a month to month. She said she was only going to be gone for a month. She said that she wanted furnished. She said she wanted outdoor space for the dogs. And she ends up getting a 1-year lease that's unfurnished. I'm sorry, but this is really starting to sound like a permanent move out, right? And I'm very curious if the producers are ever going to ask her about that or she'll ever be honest about it, right? Because to me, it seems pretty obvious what you're doing. Like, yes, is it really hard to find a month to month that's furnished? Probably, but you could probably stay like in a hotel because if it's just a month, can't you stay in a hotel or an Airbnb for a month or something like that? It just feels like yeah, it would be difficult to get a whole ass apartment for like a month to month lease in New York. But if you're going to sign a 1-year lease, to me, that seems like you've made a decision, right? Like, were you going to break that lease if things got better between you guys? Like, it really seems like you're setting the groundwork for you guys getting divorced. And the only person that isn't aware of that is Kyle. All right, let's move on to episode 4. So we start off with Whitney and Kenny going to dinner, and she brings up what the girls told her in the park about what he had said about there being no spark. Kenny says what he told Kyle was that he used to be in more of like a storybook mindset of how he believes relationships are, but now he has to sort of think about lifetime commitment, and he has a hard time getting excited about it when the spark isn't there. He's like, spark is probably the wrong word. I probably shouldn't have used the word spark. And he thinks that they have a great spark, and he thinks that where they are is great. He feels like other people are trying to poke holes in their relationship and it makes him defensive. And that's exactly what I feel like is happening, right? I mean, I'm trying to think back to what he said. I even watched it back a couple of times, and it sort of seemed like he was talking about someone else in a sense. Like he was saying like, it's hard to get excited about the idea of a long-term commitment if the spark isn't there with someone. But we're talking about Whitney, right? So I didn't really know what he meant or what he was really getting at. But that being said, I do understand the whole concept of like, you can't really just take one thing out of context and like relay it back because that's kind of unfair to the person it's being relayed back to because the context might sort of changed the entire trajectory of what the entire thing was about. Kenny tells the camera that he's annoyed that Kyle communicated this out of context, like I said, when he spent 10 minutes telling Kyle how great Whitney was. And she also brings up how he apparently referred to their future as murky. And Kenny's like, well, I never said that. Never said murky. We're going to come back to that. And this is funny because, this whole concept of like words feels very Housewives to me. I can't think of something specific, but it just really reminds me of when Housewives get really hung up on like a word or a phrase. And it's like, I didn't mean to say it like that, or that's not what I meant by this. And it just feels very, very Bravo, very nostalgic, very home, right? We get a scene of Lindsay going to Amanda's to help her move out, and Katie DeLuca joins them. Yes, we finally get a scene of Katie DeLuca. Now, Amanda tells her that she's moving into a 1-year unfurnished lease, and Lindsay seems like absolutely shocked, and so does Katie. She says, maybe we're going to try this for a little bit and see how it goes. But, it's interesting because she says later on in the episode that like anyone that she's told about this hasn't been against it. But you do have two of your friends looking pretty shocked about the idea that you're doing a 1-year lease, right? It doesn't really seem like anyone is asking her more questions about it. I don't know if they're afraid to because it's really none of their business, or they don't really know what to say. But I kind of wish people were asking her more questions. Like, why a 1-year lease? What do you plan to do about this? Do you think that this is really going to help you guys? What's the plan here, right? Katie talks a little bit about trying to have a kid for the last few months. She has come out on Instagram and talked about having, I think, at least 2 miscarriages and how much of a struggle that's been for her. So we're probably going to get a little bit more into her fertility journey throughout the rest of the season. But I don't believe that her husband is a cast member on the show, which is this something that we've talked about? Like, if you look at the poster, I don't think he's on it. I think she's in it by herself. I don't necessarily think that means he's not on the show, but I don't know why he's not like considered a cast member. Maybe he didn't have the time to be full time. I'm not really sure, but we definitely haven't seen him yet. Lindsay talks about her old friend, Dustin Lynch, coming to visit her this weekend. And she tells the camera that historically, when she's single, she has a roster. So why can't she have one as a mom? I'm here for it, Lindsay, right? I feel like some of Lindsay's funnest times are when she's single and she's out dating because she is so, what's the word? Like, she has so much confidence, which why wouldn't you when you look like her, right? But like the way that she can just go up to guys and like give them her number and start talking to them, like I've always been really enamored by that. We get a scene with Yvonne and Nick, so we get to know a little bit more about Nick. He has a business where he restores classic furniture, and he has a lot of famous clients, and he's even had to sign a lot of NDAs. This is a really interesting business, like restoring old furniture, but it's being bought by celebrities. So like everybody has like an offset of being like somewhat famous here, which is kind of interesting to me. Yvonne goes to visit him at work. She talks about how she doesn't have a job right now, which I didn't know. So she used to be the VP of marketing for one of the largest PR groups in the world. She did this for 7.5 years, but she was recently laid off. So she brings up having a baby. She feels like it's a good time. Nick is worried about time. And Yvonne is just like, I went into this marriage with the idea of starting a family, and I feel like he's trying to delay it. Again, this is kind of moot. We know that she is pregnant. We know that, they're pretty far along. So congratulations to them. But yeah, I'm curious, I guess, what is holding him back during this season. We don't know a ton about them. I don't remember how long that they've been married. I feel like not for that long. I feel like they've only been married for like a year or two, but I think that they've been together for quite a long time. So I am curious to hear why, he's of the opinion that it wasn't the right time. She is 39 at this point in time when they're filming, even though she pretends that she's 22. She's 39. So in the interest of like a biological clock, I think it's kind of unfair for him to kind of hold her off and not really give her reasons for delaying the process because quite frankly, she doesn't have a lot of time left. So, I completely concur with her. Like if they talked about having a family together and this is one of the reasons that she decided to marry him and then he keeps holding it off, holding it off, holding it off. And all of a sudden she's like 45. Well, that's not really fair to her either. Right. So I hope we get some more information on that. So then we get a scene of Danielle and Owen at home, and Danielle tells the camera that she started dating Owen 4 months after he split from his ex. But then this article came out spreading rumors that Danielle had caused them to split, that she was a home wrecker, and the whole group has been talking about it, like the group of cast members on In the City. So we get the explanation that Owen is technically married, but she is not wrecking any home. And she's really hurt that her friends are talking about this behind her back. And I think that's fair, right? Like, this is like your partner. If your friends are like possibly in like a group chat making fun of this and like, kind of not having your back about it, that's not cool. But I think Danielle is sort of like that person in the friend group that is like sort of on the outskirts of the friend group where I don't know. Have you ever had someone in your friend group like that where it's like the loser of the friend group, I guess you would call it, where like people don't really care about them that much. People make fun of them a lot. I'm not saying that's okay, but I feel like I've seen that quite a bit. Okay, and then we get a scene of Kyle and Amanda going to a bar. I guess this is for like one of their date nights. They talk about how she's moving this week because she got the actual keys. And Amanda tells the camera that, the idea of her moving out is to create space for them to actually date each other again. They talk about what that looks like, how she will come by twice a week, or they're going to hang out twice a week, how they're still going to go to therapy. And Kyle talks about how he feels like she's making decisions without him. And I completely agree, right? This is what I've been saying throughout this entire episode. It really feels like she's the one making all of the decisions when it comes to this separation, or, they're not really separated, but when it comes to this creating of space, it's like all rules that she is setting out and he just kind of has to go along with it, which makes him feel even more alone in a relationship that he was already feeling alone in. And that must create like a whole other level of loneliness for him. Now, for Amanda, she says that her biggest fear is losing him, and she's scared about how badly she wants it to work, which is something I feel like we hear her say a lot, but it's not something that comes off of her. You know what I mean? Like every time, even in the reunion, when people were asking, like, this affair with Wes must have started so much earlier. You were so checked out of your marriage. This was so obvious. And she's like, no, I wasn't. I wanted it to work so bad. There's nothing I wanted to work more. And it's like, but your actions weren't showing that. You weren't spending any time with him. You weren't even like speaking to him or looking at him or talking to him. Then during your separation, you barely, from our understanding, ended up having any of these date nights or spending any time together. So what exactly are you doing besides moving out to try to save this relationship? That's what I'm not understanding. And if you love him so much and you want this to work so bad, why do you hate spending time with him so much? And why aren't you making more of that concerted effort to spend time with him? So then they both ask each other if they're still in love with each other. And this was a very weird, awkward scene to watch because they both had to ask each other multiple times. Kyle ends up laughing during this. They both say that they do love each other, but I had to watch it a few times, you guys. I wasn't sure, right? Like I had to really look in their eyes and I couldn't tell. And isn't that telling? Like, I don't really know. Like, I couldn't tell if they love each other. And then Amanda says that she's a fucking catch and she wants to be treated as such. And it's like, girl, you are not. You are not. All right, so then the group gets together on a rooftop patio, and this is where Kenny sort of confronts everyone about his issues with the guys running their mouth about his relationship. He feels like Andrea and Kyle should have talked to him man to man instead of like gossiping. And Lexi's like, my husband wasn't gossiping. He was talking to me. I'm his wife. He tells me everything. And Andrea says that Kyle was complaining about the lack of spark, or Andrea said that Kyle said that Kenny said that he was complaining about the lack of spark in his relationship. But murky was a word that Andrea used, right? He fully admitted that, that was a word that I added on. It was just the impression that I got from the conversation that Kyle and I were having. And so my apologies, I used that word. And Kenny's like, I feel like you guys are like cherry picking like these buzzwords out of a conversation and then running your mouth and causing issues in my relationship. That is kind of what happened, right? Here's the thing. I really don't like Kenny. I really don't like his energy. I don't really like the way he comes at people. And even just the way he's doing this here, he really could have like sat down these guys and had a conversation, right? But I just feel like the combative way that he does this just creates like an energy of like, it's just a lot more than it needs to be, right? I fully understand what he's saying. If you are just sort of taking things that he said out of context, it could end up creating issues in his relationship. That's fully true. But he is the one that used the word spark. And isn't everyone's relationship murky, right? Like everyone's future is murky. My future is murky. I could die tomorrow, right? So like using the word murky, I don't really know. But Andrea is like, I'm not running my mouth. I just like talk to my wife. So like you don't really need to get like this. And Kenny will like not listen whatsoever. So Andrea ends up getting upset and leaving. And he's like, I can't deal with a fucking wall because he feels like Kenny is just being a wall and not listening to him and not taking in what he's saying, right? So then the next day, some of the girls get together, and Lindsay talks about making out with Dustin Lynch, but there was no sex. And she's like, I haven't had sex in 10 months. So she's been on like 2 dates, but no sex. She's like, I can't handle a serious relationship right now. And she likes that Dustin is sort of light and airy. Now we get this really interesting confessional from Yvonne saying that, I know that Lindsay actually still wants her fairy tale. She still wants her Prince Charming. And honestly, she deserves that. Then they talk about how Kenny was sort of like on a warpath the night before, and Lindsay calls him like a gaslighter, a narcissist, and all of these things. I don't necessarily know if he is those things, but I wish that he could maybe address his conversations in a different way because I feel like the combative way that he's doing it is just like, listen, we like conflict in our reality TV, right? So there's nothing wrong with creating conflict. But if you're not willing to ever listen to another side and you're going to block someone in the way that you were sort of being a wall with Andrea, then we can't really get anywhere, right? Like if you're the only one who's allowed to have an opinion and you're the only one that's allowed to talk and you're the only one that's allowed to be right, then we can't really proceed. It's sort of like in improv. Do you guys know the concept of yes and, which basically is like the basic tenet of improv, where it means like if someone says something in improv, which is supposed to be off the top of your head, out of the blue, like, I went to the park today, and your scene partner says, no, you didn't. Well, then they've just shut down that scene and now you can't continue. So Kenny is the scene partner who is always trying to shut down the scenes and not letting them continue because if he's going to block other people from having an opinion, then we're just not going to get to continue the scene, if you know what I'm saying, right? So I think he needs to change that a little bit. Now let's get into this last scene of Gavin, Kenny, and Whitney going to one of Gavin's bars, one of the great places where they can film. Now, Kenny brings up this conversation about the spark. He's like, I made the spark comment, but not in that context. He talks about how he feels like jaded about marriage and it's something that he has to work on. And Gavin's like, well, now that I know you said the spark comment, because first I didn't think you said it. First I thought this was being like completely made up. But now that I know you said it, I think that you want something else from Whitney. I think you want more passion. Now remember, Whitney is there. Whitney is there in this scene, right? So Gavin tells the camera that he is the Kenny relationship expert because he's seen Kenny through a million different relationships. He's been through them all. So he is the one that knows what Kenny needs. But it's a pretty rude thing to say, like in front of his actual partner. He says that, your relationship sort of sounds perfect, but perfect can kind of sound boring. Again, Whitney's right there, and you're basically calling Whitney boring. So Whitney's like, well, maybe you're used to chaos, but I'm also like the furthest thing from boring. And Gavin's like, well, maybe like, but I think like what he meant more by spark is that he wants more of like that Whitney, more of like a passionate Whitney, more of like a Whitney who's going to like be more expressive in some sort of way. And Kenny is like, these suggestions are not constructive, which I agree, right? Like they're kind of offensive, to be quite honest. And Gavin's like, I'm just trying to help and, question you. And, I just want to make sure like you guys are like in your best place. And Kenny says that he feels attacked and he feels tired of defending his relationship. And he feels like Gavin should be like the last person out of anyone that should be questioning him. So Kenny ends up getting like so heated by all of this that he ends up needing to go outside and take a breather because he feels pushed to his limit. Kenny tells the camera that Gavin knows his relationship better than anyone, and seeing, him pile on his relationship with the group is really disappointing. He feels like it must be jealousy or animosity or something like this, but he's never seen anything like this outside of Gavin. So this was a really interesting scene to watch. Again, I think the way that Gavin was communicating with Kenny and Whitney was extremely rude. You're saying things not just about the relationship, but about Whitney as a person, right? Like, listen, is Whitney boring? Yes. Okay, but you don't want to tell her that to her face and say that about her on national TV. Like, that's extremely rude. again, I don't feel like we know these people well enough to know like their MO, and I don't really know if this is just sort of who Gavin is. I'm getting the vibe that maybe not, considering Kenny is really put off by this. If this was just sort of the way Gavin is, maybe Kevin, or sorry, I keep still needing to get used to these names. I think that Kenny may not have been as put off by it, but I I think it's possible that Gavin was just trying to do too much for TV. This is also their all, or for not all of them, but for some of them, this is their first foray into reality TV. Maybe Gavin felt like he had to do a lot. Maybe he felt like he had to put on a scene. But that being said, it's to the detriment of your friend and their relationship. And, you know, I feel like Kenny is very right in the sense that he feels like people are coming at his relationship and it's making him defensive. I feel like that's exactly what we're seeing. I feel like maybe he didn't think that he was going to be that person on this show. And so he's sort of taken aback by it. And that's why he's acting out the way that he is. But, you know, I think that he needs to maybe take a different stance when it comes to how to react, because I just don't think that the defensive way that he's acting is just necessarily good for the show. It's also what he's doing online. Like, he gets super defensive online. He's in the comments constantly and stuff. And I just don't feel like it's necessarily like the quote unquote right way to go when it comes to reality TV. But I'm still interested in him as a reality TV character. I know that he's not well liked, but I think he's sort of that perfect villain, because there's nothing about him where we're like, we hate this guy. He's like committed a crime or something in the past and he shouldn't be allowed on reality TV. It's nothing like that. We just sort of think he's kind of a douche. And a douche is sort of a perfect reality TV villain. So I think he's great for this. I think he just needs to figure out a different way to respond to what he doesn't like, both on camera and off camera. Okay, guys, that is the end of the episode. We are now caught up with all of the episodes so far of In the City. As I mentioned, I'll be back on Friday with Jamie Rice to talk about In the City episode 5. But you'll also see me back for other episodes this week. Until then, you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at The Bravo Investigator. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel where you can watch episodes like today and join the Facebook group. I love you, BBs, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Bravo Investigator podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at the Bravo Investigator. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and join the Facebook page. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a 5-star review.